The year is 1930. The world is standing directly between two world wars, though nobody knows it yet. The Great Depression has swallowed the global economy whole. After the collapse of the New York Stock Exchange, America looks like ruins, and the shockwaves have already reached the factory floors of Europe. Chimneys have gone cold. Workers are sharing hunger and uncertainty on the same street corners. In Berlin, a terrifying figure named Adolf Hitler is slowly, steadily rising. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin is crushing farmers under an iron fist. The world is exhausted, frightened, and deeply unstable. It is precisely at this moment that a tiny country on the other side of the world stands up and announces, "We will host the World Cup." The country is Uruguay. Population fewer than 3 million people. They began building a magnificent new stadium, the Estadio Centenario, named to honor the centenary of their independence. It was supposed to open in April. Workers labored around the clock. But the rain came, the ground turned to mud, and the stadium was not finished until 5 days after the tournament had already started. Europe, meanwhile, was barely showing up. Only 4 European nations made the journey across the Atlantic: France, Belgium, Romania, and Yugoslavia. The major powers stayed home. England was not even a FIFA member yet. Germany, Italy, Spain, none of them came. The official reason given was the distance. The real reason was something closer to arrogance. For those who did come, the journey itself was a kind of expedition. They boarded a ship called the SS Count Verde and spent 2 weeks at sea. On the deck, in whatever small space they could find, they trained, surrounded by salt wind and open ocean. The French goalkeeper Alex Thépot wrote a letter home to his mother. He told her they kept losing practice balls over the side into the Atlantic. 3 balls lost so far, he wrote. Our captain says if we lose a 4th, we won't have a ball left to play with. On one of those nights in the middle of the ocean, a Romanian player was sick over the railing and muttered that if his king hadn't personally insisted he come, he never would have boarded the ship. This was entirely true. King Carol II of Romania had personally selected his national squad, because even then, some people already understood that football was not merely a sport, it was prestige. It was larger than life, it was politics. And then history began to be written. The first goal in World Cup history was scored by a 22-year-old Frenchman named Lucien Laurent. He was a mechanic by trade. He scored in the 19th minute against Mexico. Years later, close to the end of his life, he said, "None of us realized we were making history. We thought it was just another match. History is always like that. You don't recognize it while you're standing inside it." The final came down to the 2 most passionate football nations on the same river, Uruguay versus Argentina, separated only by the Rio de la Plata. Buenos Aires erupted before kickoff. Montevideo erupted before kickoff. There was even a dispute over which ball to use. They agreed to play the first half with Argentina's ball and the second half with Uruguay's. Argentina led 2-1 at halftime, then the ball changed and the game seemed to change with it. Uruguay scored 4 times in the second half and won the first World Cup 4-2. The streets of Montevideo erupted in celebration. In Buenos Aires, people threw stones at the Uruguayan embassy and shattered the windows. The 2 countries severed diplomatic relations. For 3 days, 2 neighbors refused to acknowledge each other's existence over a round leather ball. The Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, who famously despised football, once claimed the sport was popular only because stupidity was popular. But Gilano answered him in his book, "Those who say football is just a game and has nothing to do with human emotion have learned to despise humanity. Football is life." Football occupies a vast territory inside the human heart, and the 1930 World Cup had already made that perfectly, unmistakably clear. 1934, Rome. 4 years later, the stage moved to Italy, but Italy in 1934 was not simply a country. It was a showcase for an ideology. Benito Mussolini had been in power for 12 years. Some claimed he had bribed FIFA to secure the hosting rights. No one ever proved it. No one ever convincingly disproved it either. What Mussolini understood with absolute clarity was this: a stadium is a kind of cathedral without a god. And when the throne at the center is empty, it is remarkably easy to place yourself on it as a deity. This was a lesson that Hitler and later Stalin and many others after them would also eventually learn. Mussolini built stadiums. He put his face on posters on every wall in Rome. The stadium was thick with fascist symbolism, even printed on match tickets. Posters declared that football was the testing ground of Italian manhood. His coach was Vittorio Pozzo. Pozzo brought in 3 players from Argentina, Monti, Orsi, and Guaita. All 3 were of Italian descent. A new law made it simple. If Italian blood runs in your veins, you can wear the Italian shirt. Luis Monti had played in the 1930 final for Argentina and lost. Now he played in the 1934 final for Italy and won. Same man, different jersey, different result. The question of what nation means in football was born in that moment and has never been fully answered. Before the semi-final against Austria, the Swedish referee Ivan Eklund was seen dining privately with Mussolini the evening before the match. The next day, Eklund refereed the game. Italy won 1-0. 2 clearly valid Austrian goals were disallowed. Nobody has ever been able to explain them satisfactorily. After the match, Eklund returned to Mussolini's box, shook his hand, and smiled. History preserved that smile. The final on June 10, 1934, was Italy versus Czechoslovakia. There is a story, possibly true, possibly invented, that Mussolini sent the Italian team a telegram before the match containing just 2 words: win or die. At 70 minutes, Czechoslovakia led 1-0. With 9 minutes left, Orsi equalized. The game went to extra time. In the 95th minute, Angelo Schiavio scored the winner. Italy won 2-1. Mussolini stood and applauded. The entire stadium rose, and the fascist salute, thousands of arms raised simultaneously toward the sky, filled the Roman afternoon. The next day, every newspaper in Rome carried the same headline: Italy has won. Fascist Italy has won. It was not inaccurate. Italy and fascism were the same thing. 1938, Paris, France hosted the next World Cup, but the world had changed entirely. Europe was slowly catching fire. The Spanish Civil War was tearing a nation apart. And just months before the 1938 tournament began in March, Adolf Hitler annexed Austria. The event became known as the Anschluss. Austria had qualified for the World Cup. But suddenly there was no Austria. The country had been erased from the map. Austrian players were forced into German jerseys. All of them complied, all of them except one. His name was Matthias Sindelar. They called him the Paper Man, so light he seemed to float on the wind, but his true nickname was the Mozart of football. The Viennese writer Friedrich Torberg wrote about him. Sindelar played football the way Kafka wrote stories. Sindelar refused to put on the Nazi uniform. He said he was too old, that his knees hurt, that he couldn't represent Germany. Everyone knew it was a lie. Everyone admired him for telling it. In January 1939, Sindelar was found dead in his Vienna apartment, alongside his girlfriend. A faulty stove had released carbon monoxide into the sealed flat. The official papers said accident. But nobody believed the official papers. 15,000 people walked behind his coffin through the streets of Nazi-occupied Vienna. No slogans, no loudspeakers, just flowers, just silence. Just tears. Back at the tournament, Italy wore black jerseys in their opening match in Marseille against France, the color of fascism. The crowd booed immediately. Italy's players extended the fascist salute in the center circle. The booing grew louder. Coach Pozzo screamed from the sideline, "Do not lower your arms until the noise stops." The players held the salute for 2 full minutes. Eventually, the crowd fell silent. Only then did the players lower their hands. Italy won the final against Hungary 4-2. Afterward, Hungary's goalkeeper Antal Szabo said something the whole world remembered. "In all my life, I have never been so happy to lose a match, because my defeat today saved 11 lives." The Italian players had apparently received the same 2-word telegram from Mussolini that had arrived 4 years earlier: win or die. Mussolini won 2 World Cups. 7 years later, in 1945, he hung upside down from a petrol station in Milan, his body unrecognizable. The World Cup trophy was hidden in a shoebox under the bed of a bank manager named Ottorino Baresi for 6.5 years. The greatest symbol of fascist triumph preserved in a shoebox. 1942 and 1946 silence. No World Cup in 1942, no World Cup in 1946. The world was busy with a different competition. 60 million human beings would die in it. Football stadiums became weapons depots. London's Highbury Stadium became a blood donation center. Berlin's Olympic Stadium became a Soviet military camp. From Kiev came a story, the match of death, in which Ukrainian workers played against Nazi occupiers. The Ukrainians won. They were reportedly never seen again. Football had never promised anything about survival. In the silence between the wars, a man named Albert Camus stood and thought. Before he became one of the 20th century's most important philosophers, he had been a goalkeeper for Racing Universitaire d'Alger. Tuberculosis removed him from the pitch. But the pitch never left him. He wrote, "Everything I know about ethics and the obligations of human beings I learned from football." 1950, RIODEJANEIRO, the World Cup returned. Brazil. And Brazil had already written the ending before the match began. A newspaper printed photographs of the national team calling them world champions on the morning of the final. A victory song was already on the radio. The city mayor told the players, "You who will be crowned champions tomorrow, I congratulate you in advance." Brazil built the Maracana for this moment. Capacity 200,000 people. No stadium in history has ever held more. Brazil needed only a draw in the final round-robin match to win. Uruguay needed a victory. Before the match, Uruguay's captain Obdulio Verla gathered his teammates and told them, "Don't read tomorrow's newspapers. They've already buried us on paper. On the pitch tomorrow there will be 11 of them and 11 of us, nothing more." July 16, 1950. The Maracana held somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000 people, some of whom had forced their way through broken gates. In the 47th minute, Friasa scored for Brazil. The stadium shook, Rio shook. In the 66th minute, Schiaffino equalized for Uruguay. The crowd went eerily silent. But Brazil still only needed a draw. Then came Alcides Giguia, Uruguay's right winger. He drove inside. Brazilian goalkeeper Mozart Barbosa anticipated a cross and shifted one step to his right. Giguia didn't cross, Giguia shot. 200,000 people and the silence of a cathedral. Years later, Giguia said something that became permanently woven into football's fabric. "Only 3 people have ever silenced the Maracana. Frank Sinatra, the Pope, and me. Uruguay were champions." Brazil's president quietly handed the trophy to a Uruguayan official and walked away. This match earned its own name in Portuguese, Maracanazo, the blow of the Maracana. People died of heart attacks in the stands. In the week that followed, reports came from cities across Brazil, people jumping from rooftops, shooting themselves, stepping in front of trains. A Brazilian playwright wrote, "Every country has its national disaster. For some, it is Hiroshima. Ours is the Maracanazo, but the heaviest part of this story belongs to one man, Mozart Barbosa." The goalkeeper, a black man from a poor family, 29 years old on that Sunday. One goal he could not stop, one goal that rewrote everything that came after. From the next day, he was cursed. The Brazilian Football Confederation never called him for the national team again. In 1963, he burned the actual Maracana goalposts in his backyard. He had purchased them specifically for this purpose. It didn't help. In 1993, Barbosa went to the national team's training camp to offer his encouragement. He was not allowed inside. Someone told him he brought bad luck. 43 years later, and a man was still being blamed for one goal. Barbosa said on that day, "In this country, the maximum sentence for any crime is 30 years. I have been serving 50 years for a crime I did not commit." He died in 2000 in a small flat in Sao Paulo without money, without recognition. The day before he died, he said, "I am tired of crying." Brazil had never truly forgiven the Maracanazo. What it had really never forgiven was itself. 1954, Bern, this was the year the world was certain Hungary would win. They were called the Magical Magyars. Their captain, Ferenc Puskás, had a left foot like a musical instrument, every shot and every pass resembling something composed rather than kicked. For 4 years and 32 matches, they had not lost a single game. In 1953, they had traveled to Wembley and beaten England 6-3 in England's own stadium, England's first home defeat in 90 years. The final was in Bern, Switzerland. West Germany were the opponents, a broken country still rebuilding from the rubble. Hungary led 2-0 after just 8 minutes. But then, in one of football's most inexplicable reversals, West Germany came back, 2-2, then 3-2 at the whistle, the miracle of Bern. A German writer later wrote, that July evening in 1954 was West Germany's true birthday. A nation that had committed atrocities that still haunted the world discovered it could stand up straight again, but there was a footnote that took 40 years to be spoken aloud. The German team doctor had injected the players before the match with what he described as vitamin C. Decades of German medical research later suggested something else entirely, possibly Pervitin, a methamphetamine used to suppress fatigue and fear in Nazi soldiers during the war. Several German players fell seriously ill after the final, but the scoreboard read 3-2 and the history book said miracle, and everyone agreed to keep the story clean for 40 years. Hungary went home to find the streets full of fury, not celebration. A team unbeaten for 4 years had lost one match. That single loss was unforgivable. Football can transform love into hatred with terrifying speed. 2 years later, Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest. The revolution left over 100,000 people dead. Puskás went to Madrid and became a legend again, but in a foreign jersey. He never wore the Hungarian shirt again. The country that had loved him most was the one he could never go home to. 1958, Stockholm. Into this tournament walked a 17-year-old Brazilian boy. His given name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world would come to know him as Pelé. The Brazilian Federation had not wanted to include him. His coach said he was too young. Pelé begged for the chance and said, "I want to play for my father." Pelé's father Dindinho had been a footballer whose career ended with a shattered knee in his first professional match. When Pelé was 9 years old, he had sat on his father's shoulders listening to the 1950 Maracanazo on the radio while his father wept. The small boy said, "Don't cry, Papa. I'll grow up and bring you the World Cup myself." 8 years later, he kept his word. In the final against Sweden, the teenager Pelé scored twice. The Swedish supporters rose to their feet and applauded for a player on the opposing team, because there are certain moments of beauty that carry no passport. 1962, Chile. 2 years before this World Cup in 1960, the largest earthquake ever recorded in human history struck Chile. Magnitude 9.5, thousands died, hundreds of thousands lost their homes. FIFA considered moving the tournament. Chile's Football Federation president Carlos Ditborn traveled to FIFA's headquarters and made a speech. "We have nothing, and because we have nothing, we have everything. We want this World Cup." Ditborn never saw it. He died of a heart attack at 37 months before the opening match. A Chilean stadium now carries his name. Brazil won the championship. But Garrincha was there, a man called the Little Bird, whose right leg was 6 centimeters shorter than his left from birth and whose spine was naturally curved. Doctors had told him he would never walk normally. He did not walk, he flew, he dribbled past defenders as if they were furniture. Gilano wrote about him, on the pitch he had no enemies, not even in the opposing stands. When he played, the football pitch became a circus and the ball became a trained animal. Football eventually let Garrincha go. When it did, he had nothing left but alcohol. He died at 49 from liver cirrhosis. Most of his money was in other people's pockets. Brazil mourned him for a day, then forgot him for 40 years. His gravestone reads, "Here lies the man who brought joy to the people." 1966, England. North Korea arrived at the 1966 World Cup and did something nobody expected. They beat Italy 1-0. The English crowd, which had initially jeered the communist nation, applauded them at the final whistle. In the quarterfinal, North Korea led Portugal 3-0 after 24 minutes. Then Eusebio scored 4 goals, Portugal won 5-3, North Korea went home. Kim Il-sung personally greeted them as heroes initially, then the stories changed. Several players had allegedly been out celebrating, drinking, meeting women. They were sent for re-education. To labor camps, some say, to mines. Several names stopped appearing in any public record. 44 years later, a British documentary filmmaker searched for the survivors. He found some elderly, composed, smiling. They said, "Nothing happened to us, nothing happened to us." Nothing happened to us, one sentence 3 times. There is a kind of sentence that becomes less believable with every repetition. Meanwhile, the Jules Rimet trophy itself had been stolen from a London exhibition 4 months before the tournament. A week later, a man walking his dog in a South London park found it. The dog's name was Pickles. Overnight, Pickles became a national hero. Newspapers, television, advertising campaigns. England won the tournament. Everyone remembers Jeff Hurst's hat trick. Almost no one remembers Pickles. The dog died the following year, tangled in its own leash. 1970, Mexico. The 1970 World Cup was the first broadcast in color television, Pelé's 3rd World Cup. In the final, Carlos Alberto scored what many call the most beautiful goal in tournament history. But the story I want to tell is from the year before. In 1969, Honduras and El Salvador faced each other in World Cup qualifying. A Salvadoran woman named Emilia Bolaños could not bear her country's loss in the first leg and took her own life. The story spread across newspapers. When the second leg was played in El Salvador, Salvadoran fans burned the Honduran flag during their national anthem. What followed was 100 days of actual war. 3,000 people died. Polish journalist Ryszard Kapuscinski, who covered the conflict and wrote an entire book about it, was careful to say, "Football did not cause the war. Football was the pretext." The real causes, land, hunger, poverty, displacement between 2 desperate nations, were old and half invisible. People will not die for abstractions. Football gave them something vivid to hold onto. Football enters every home more easily than religion or government. And so when it speaks, people listen, sometimes with their fists. 1974, West Germany. Holland invented total football. No fixed positions. Every player could be anywhere on the pitch at any moment. Their captain was Johan Cruyff, a man who didn't just play football but turned it into something approaching philosophy. Cruyff said, "Football is played with the head. The feet are just instruments." In the final against West Germany, Holland scored before Germany had even touched the ball. But the script unraveled. Germany equalized, then led, then won 3-2. Cruyff said afterward, "Winning the cup is secondary. What matters is how you played." He was right about everything except that it cost him the one thing he never got to hold. 1978, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Military dictator Jorge Rafael Videla had been in power for 2 years. In those 2 years, his government had made approximately 30,000 people disappear. Students, teachers, journalists, union leaders, lawyers, poets, musicians, teenagers, no category was exempt. In Argentina, they were called Los Desaparecidos, the disappeared. Videla decided the World Cup would be Argentina's celebration. FIFA agreed. The River Plate Stadium was chosen as the main venue. 1,100 meters from the stadium stood a white building officially known as the Navy Mechanics School. It was Argentina's largest secret detention center, its largest torture facility. Approximately 5,000 people passed through its doors. Only a few hundred came back out. Those who did not return had no names inside those walls. They were numbers. Number 280, number 774. Number 856. Pregnant women gave birth inside the facility. For 2 days, they were allowed to hold their newborns. Then the babies were taken, handed to regime-loyal families as adoptees. The mothers were blindfolded, bound, loaded onto military aircraft, and dropped alive into the open ocean. These flights were called vuelos de la muerte, death flights. Argentine writer Osvaldo Bayer wrote, 1978 was perhaps the strangest World Cup in history. On one side, the roar of the stadium. On the other side, screams from the basement. The distance between them, 1,100 meters. One survivor recalled, "On the nights Argentina scored a goal, the crowd's celebration was audible even through the walls, even above everything else happening in those rooms." Outside in the Plaza de Mayo, a group of mothers gathered every Thursday afternoon, white scarves on their heads made from their missing children's diapers, in their hands, photographs. Police tried to disperse them. A court order said no more than 2 people could stand together, so the mothers started walking. Walking was not covered by the order. They walked in circles counterclockwise around the plaza. The world's cameras were all pointed at the goalposts. The mothers understood that to be invisible was another way of disappearing. So they kept walking. In the final on June 25th, Argentina beat the Netherlands 3-1 after extra time. Mario Kempes scored twice. The stadium disappeared under a blizzard of white confetti. Videla smiled in his presidential box, and 1,100 meters away, a prisoner was taken from his cell. A radio was placed in his hands. He was told, "Tonight is a night of joy." Sing the national anthem, he refused. They beat him until he sang. Years later, after his release, he said, "That anthem was the greatest humiliation of my life. I have never forgiven myself for singing it." Mario Kempes wept decades later when he understood what had been happening 1,100 meters from his greatest moment. He said, "We were in a bubble. We did not know Johan Cruyff had not gone to the tournament. For years it was said he stayed away as a political protest against Videla." In 2008, Cruyff finally revealed the truth. Months before the tournament, armed men had broken into his Barcelona home, forced his family to the floor at gunpoint. His children's hands were tied. His wife had a gun at her head. He was released, but that night never left him. He decided he could not take his family to Argentina. He told no one for 30 years. 1982, Spain had just emerged from Franco's dictatorship. The World Cup was meant to celebrate the new democracy. But this tournament produced one of the ugliest matches in history, the disgrace of Gijón, West Germany versus Austria. Both teams knew the arithmetic. A narrow German victory would send both through to the next round and eliminate Algeria. After 10 minutes, Germany scored. Then both teams seemed to reach a silent agreement. For the remaining 80 minutes, no attack, no risk, no competition, just midfield passing, just time wasting. In the stands, Algerian supporters wept. German supporters raged. The whole world watched football seem to lose a piece of its soul. The final score was 1-0, but nobody won anything that day. Spanish football philosopher Jorge Valdano, who would himself win a World Cup for Argentina in 1986, wrote, "Football can survive many things, but football cannot survive indifference." What happened in Gijón was not defeat. It was the removal of football's spirit from its own body. Italy won the championship. Their top scorer was Paolo Rossi, a man 2 years earlier had been banned for match fixing, who had served time, whose suspension expired literally the day before the World Cup began. From a punishment cell to the Golden Boot, football forgives sometimes. Human beings are slower about it. 1986, Mexico City. 4 years before this tournament, in 1982, Argentina and England had fought a real war over the Falkland Islands. 649 Argentine soldiers died, many of them teenagers from working-class neighborhoods, barely 18 years old. Diego Maradona later said that when he walked onto the Azteca pitch for the quarterfinal against England, he was thinking about those boys. In the 51st minute, the ball floated in the penalty area. An English defender headed it backward. Maradona, 5 feet 5 inches tall, rose alongside goalkeeper Peter Shilton, 6 feet 1. Shilton's gloves were reaching, and Maradona's left hand, not his head, his hand, guided the ball over the line. The referee saw nothing. Goal given. Afterward, Maradona said it was scored a little by the head of Maradona and a little by the hand of God. La mano de Dios, but 4 minutes later something else happened. Maradona received the ball in his own half in the center of the pitch, surrounded by English defenders. He turned and ran. He passed Beardsley. He passed Reed. He passed Butcher. He drifted past Shilton as the goalkeeper came out. Butcher chased back. Maradona drifted past him too. 60-odd yards, 10 seconds, 6 touches, goal. Argentine commentator Victor Hugo Morales lost himself on the radio. He was shouting and crying simultaneously. He called him Barrilete Cosmico, cosmic kite. Galano wrote, Maradona was extraordinary not simply because of what he could do with a ball. He was extraordinary because he was the voice of every poor boy who has never been permitted to speak back to power. Every dribble was revenge. The first goal was justice. The second goal was genius. Argentina beat West Germany 3-2 in the final. Maradona scored nothing in the final. But in the 83rd minute, with the score at 2-2, he delivered a pass from midfield to Jorge Burruchaga that won Argentina the championship. 1990s Naples. By 1990, Maradona had made Napoli European champions. In Naples, he was not merely a footballer. He was a saint, a savior. Babies were named Diego. His image hung beside portraits of Christ on apartment walls. Then the semi-final, Argentina versus Italy. Venue, Naples, Maradona's own city. For which country would the Neapolitans cheer? Maradona told them before the match, for 364 days a year, we are brothers. Don't make us enemies for one day. Naples divided. Argentina won on penalties. The next morning, a Naples newspaper ran, we are confused. We followed our God, but our God turns out to be a foreigner. Italy never forgave him. In 1991, Maradona tested positive for cocaine and was banned for 15 months. He left Naples. He never came back, and Germany beat Argentina in the final 1-0. Within days, East and West Germany reunified. Germany had won the World Cup in 1954, 1974, and 1990. Each victory had arrived alongside a defining moment in their national story. Football always walks alongside history, sometimes slightly ahead. 1994, United States FIFA took football to America, a country that barely played it. American television networks demanded prime-time slots. FIFA agreed. Matches played at noon under a 40-degree sun. Players collapsed, vomited on sidelines, lost kilograms in fluids during a single game. But the real story of 1994 belongs to a Colombian defender named Andrés Escobar. Pelé had predicted before the tournament that Colombia could reach the final. But Colombia's coach Francisco Maturana had received a written threat: keep a specific player off the squad or your son dies. The player was left out. Colombia had lost before a single ball was kicked. In a group match against the United States, Escobar accidentally deflected the ball into his own net. Colombia were eliminated. They flew home. Escobar's family urged him to leave the country for a while. He said, I haven't committed any crime. I'm not going anywhere. 10 days later, in a Medellin parking lot, 6 shots were fired into his body. With each shot, the gunman shouted, goal, 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 goal. A Colombian writer said afterward, those gunshots forced Colombia to look at itself in a mirror. We realized that in our country, football and life were not separate. Both lived in the shadow of drugs. A stadium in Medellin was named after him, Estadio Andrés Escobar. Football has overtime, life does not. The final, Brazil against Italy, goalless after 90 minutes and extra time. Penalty shootout. Italy's greatest player, Roberto Baggio, stepped up for the decisive kick. The ball sailed over the crossbar into the darkening sky. Baggio stood motionless, head bowed, as Brazil erupted. He wrote in his autobiography years later, those 5 seconds have played inside me every day since. And then he wrote, only the one who has the courage to take a penalty can ever miss one. 2002, Japan and South Korea. For 35 years, Japan had occupied Korea. The wounds had never fully healed, yet the two nations co-hosted a World Cup together. Sometimes football manages what politics cannot. The opening match, defending champions France versus Senegal, a country that had spent centuries under French colonial rule, whose players had learned their football in French leagues, who had never before qualified for a World Cup. Senegalese captain Aliou Cissé told his teammates before kickoff, today we play for our ancestors, for the people who sailed on French ships in chains, for those who died in French factories. Today we repay that debt in 90 minutes. In the 30th minute, Papa Bouba Diop scored. Senegal won 1-0. At 3 in the morning in Dakar, millions of people poured into the streets. The defending champions had been beaten on opening day by a team playing in their first World Cup ever. Brazilian striker Ronaldo, who after 2 surgeries and career-ending predictions had returned, scored twice as Brazil beat Germany 2-0 in the final. The phenomenon had come back. 2006, Germany's Zinedine Zidane headbutted Marco Materazzi in the final and was sent off. The world saw it, but there is another story from 2006 that almost no one remembers. Germany's backup goalkeeper was Robert Enke. He sat in the stands for the entire World Cup while the starting keeper played. He had recently become a father. His daughter Lara was born with a heart condition. 2 years after the tournament, at the age of 2, Lara died. Robert Enke never recovered. 3 years after the World Cup in 2009, he stepped in front of a train at 32 years old. The things that happen away from the floodlights are sometimes the most important things. As for Zidane, after his red card, he walked off the pitch and passed within meters of the World Cup trophy on its podium. He never looked at it, he kept walking. French philosopher Jean Baudrillard wrote that Zidane's headbutt was the purest act of the century. In one moment he sacrificed his career, his legacy, everything, for the irreducible demand of personal dignity. Zidane's parents had come from Algeria. Today's world does not understand this, Baudrillard wrote, because today's world has learned to put a price on everything. Zidane reminded us that certain things cannot be sold. 2010, South Africa. For the first time, the World Cup came to Africa, Nelson Mandela's country. 6 days before the opening ceremony, Mandela's great-granddaughter Zenani, 13 years old, was killed in a car crash returning from the opening concert. Mandela could not attend the opening. He came to the final in his wheelchair, though, and said, "Football has the power to change the world, to inspire people, to unite humanity in a way that little else can. Football speaks to youth in a language it understands. Where there was once only despair, there is now hope." 3 years later, he was gone. That World Cup was his last great public appearance. The government had spent $4 billion on 10 new stadiums. South African writer Zakes Mda pointed out that the same money could have built 400,000 houses. Instead, the world got 1 month of vuvuzelas, music, and celebration. Then everyone flew home. The lights went out, the empty stadiums stood. The shantytowns of Johannesburg continued precisely as before. Spain won the championship. The Netherlands lost a World Cup final for the 3rd time in their history. 2014, at Brazil, for the first time in 64 years, Brazil hosted the World Cup. In June 2013, 1 million people marched in 10 cities across the country. The protests began over a 20-cent bus fare increase, but that was just the spark. The real fuel was the government spending $11 billion on stadiums while hospitals and schools collapsed. Demonstrators carried signs reading, "We want FIFA-quality hospitals. We want FIFA-quality schools." Police fired tear gas. 5 people died. The tournament began. Brazil won the first match. The protests quieted. Football can silence even righteous anger temporarily. Then came the semi-final. Below horizon, Brazil versus Germany. A camera found a 12-year-old girl named Juliana da Silva on her father's shoulders in the stadium. Her face was in her hands. She was crying so deeply that her image traveled around the world within hours. The following week she said, "I was crying because I didn't understand how my country could be so bad. My father had saved up all year to come here. He was crying even harder than I was." Germany beat Brazil 7-1. The next morning, Brazilian novelist Luiz Fernando Veríssimo wrote, "1950 made us cry. 2014 made us ashamed. Tears are dignified. Shame is not." After 1950, we still believed we were the emperors of football. After 2014, we understand we are merely consumers of it. Brazilians invented a new word, migrant, the second great blow. In the final, Messi's Argentina lost to Germany in extra time, 1-0. 2018, Russia had annexed Crimea. Western sanctions were in place. Syrian cities were being bombed. But the World Cup was Putin's, and FIFA President Gianni Infantino said it would show the world Russia's true face. Croatia, a nation of 4 million people, reached the final. Their captain was Luka Modric. In 1991, when Modric was 6 years old, Serbian forces arrived in his village. His grandfather, also named Luka, was herding cattle in the hills. Soldiers shot him dead. The small boy saw it. The family fled to a refugee camp in Zadar, living in a converted hotel. In the parking lot, 7-year-old Luka kicked a ball among the parked cars while bombs fell in the distance. His father mended army uniforms. Sometimes he brought home scraps of military fabric. His mother sewed them into a football jersey for her son. Luka wore that homemade jersey in the parking lot. A local coach named Tomislav Basic saw him one afternoon and said, "I will make this boy the greatest footballer Croatia has ever produced." The Croatian Federation initially refused to consider Modric. Too small, they said, too slight, malnourished from the war years, his spine weakened, the coach insisted. 27 years later, the thin boy from the parking lot was one of the finest midfielders on the planet. Croatia lost the final to France 4-2. In the Moscow downpour afterward, Putin stood completely dry under an umbrella held by a soldier, while every other world leader, including the Croatian president who had embraced each of her players in the rain, stood soaked. The image said everything about power and everything about everything else. Modric won the Golden Ball as the tournament's best player. When he received the trophy, he wept. He said he was thinking of his grandfather. He said, "He always told me never give up, Luka. If he is somewhere today, I think he saw this." 2022, Qatar, a tiny desert nation of 3 million people built on oil money, held the World Cup. The right to host it was voted on in 2010 by 22 FIFA officials. In the 12 years since, 16 of those 22 had faced charges of corruption or bribery. 7 stadiums were built. Metro systems, hotels, roads, all constructed to receive the world. But the question that kept returning louder and louder with every year was, who built them? They came from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, the Philippines, Kenya. Many had borrowed $3,000 from labor brokers to pay for the chance to work, or had mortgaged family land. They lived 8 or 10 to a room, sleeping in shifts. They worked in temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Qatar's kafala system, a sponsorship arrangement under which your employer holds your passport, controls whether you can change jobs, controls whether you can leave the country, had another name: modern slavery. Wages $150 to $250 per month. In 2021, The Guardian estimated that at least 6,500 migrant workers had died in Qatar between 2010 and 2020. Most official records listed the cause as natural cardiac arrest. But the question has never been answered. How do healthy men in their 20s and 30s, men who passed medical examinations before being permitted to travel, die of heart attacks in such numbers? A Bangladeshi worker's father told a journalist, "My son was 23 years old. He was dead within 6 months. They told me he died in his sleep. But how does this happen to a boy of 23? During the tournament, a Kenyan worker named John Kibet Kaluku, who had helped build one of the stadiums and was cleaning hotel rooms during the tournament, fell in a bathroom and died. He was 24. Neither FIFA nor the Qatari government offered his family any compensation. His mother said, "John told me he would work 1 year, save enough, come home and build us a proper house. He came home, but in a coffin." The matches were brilliant. The crowds cheered and wept and danced. John's name appeared in no newspaper. No one observed a minute of silence. German philosopher Byung-Chul Han has written, "Today's capitalism has learned to make pain invisible." When we are celebrating, someone else's blood is being spilled somewhere we are not permitted to see. Qatar's World Cup was a perfect illustration of this. Lights blazing in the stadium, silence and suffering just behind the wall, and both refusing to acknowledge the other's existence. The final, Argentina versus France, possibly the greatest World Cup final ever played. Argentina led 2-0, France equalized, extra time, more goals, penalties, Argentina won. And Lionel Messi at last lifted the trophy, 36 years after Maradona's hand and foot had written Argentina into eternity. Epilogue: there is no game on earth quite like football. All you need is a ball. It can be made of rags. It can be a plastic bag twisted tight. It can be made of paper. The poorest child on earth can play it. The poorest nation on earth can defeat the richest and most powerful nation on earth in 90 minutes with nothing but 11 people and their feet. For those 90 minutes, the arithmetic of wealth is suspended. The calculus of power is suspended. The colors of passports are suspended. This is democracy, not the kind you vote for, but the kind you run toward. The Brazilian footballer philosopher Socrates, a medical doctor who captained Brazil in 1982 and 1986, who created a democratic cooperative within his own club to resist military dictatorship, once said, "Football is much more than a game for me. It is art, it is resistance, it is humanity. Every time I walked onto the pitch, I felt I was answering a question. The question was, is a person free? For 90 minutes, the answer was yes. Football is larger than life because life makes us small. There is nothing else on this planet capable of making this many human beings do the same thing in the same moment, weep together, embrace strangers, believe in something beyond their individual grief." Albert Camus, who stopped playing football when tuberculosis took his lungs but who never stopped thinking about the game, said, "In the football pitch, I first learned that the ball never comes from the direction you expected. That single lesson taught me everything I needed to know about life." Galano ended his book, the most beautiful book about football ever written, with a sentence that has stayed with me: "Against all evidence, against all reason, against all hope, I will remain a beggar of beautiful football. And when it arrives, when a truly great goal is scored, when a move of impossible elegance unfolds on a pitch somewhere in this complicated world, I will thank God for this small, luminous miracle." We are all beggars in the end, waiting for one more beautiful World Cup, one more moment when the ball travels exactly where it was always meant to go. We keep waiting, and we keep coming back. Because that is what love does, it never knows when to stop.